Hello, everyone. This is Mr. Millette with an AP World History presentation. Today's presentation is all about developments in American civilizations between 1200 and 1450, another of our main topics in our first unit. Again, our first unit is titled The Global Tapestry, where we are taking snapshots of the political, social, cultural, and economic developments of different late post-classical period civilizations. Last time we looked at developments in South and Southeast Asian civilizations between 1200 and 1450, and today we'll spin the globe again and find our focus on the other hemisphere, the Western Hemisphere, where American civilizations developed. Like we did with our study of the Eastern Hemispheric civilizations, we will, once again, look for trends, parallels, and points of comparison and contrast among these Western Hemispheric American civilizations within the global tapestry. By the end of this presentation, you'll be expected to be able to demonstrate your understanding of this one learning objective. Not bad. 1. Explain how and why states in the Americas developed and changed over time. State building in the Americas began with the emergence of small and independent city-states. But in regions such as Mesoamerica and South America, those independent city-states eventually transitioned to larger regional and multi-regional empires. These political developments were possible due to environments that were conducive to agriculture, with necessary access to fresh water, rainfall, and plant diversity. In spite of some significant absences in the Western Hemisphere that were clearly present in the earliest agrarian states of the Eastern Hemisphere, states in the Americas thrived without metalworks and with few large domesticated animals. However, these proximal and environmental limitations, at least in mineral resources and large domesticated animals, may have also been some of the very reasoning for American civilization's inabilities to defend themselves from European empire building after 1492. But long before 1492, throughout the Americas, cities emerged independent of each other and developed as city-states with their own political and economic elites. However, many of the inhabitants of the various city-states shared cultural and intellectual trends, such as art, architecture, religious beliefs, economic and commercial practices, rituals, language, and writing and record-keeping systems. Eventually, new peoples arrived in the pre-existing civilizations of Mesoamerica and South America and designed much more elaborate political and social systems, such as bureaucratic governments, standing professional armies, tributary systems, and regulation of trade and trade routes. These more elaborate systems and methods enabled a far greater imperial control of the numerous former independent city-states of these American regions. The Mesoamerican landscape enabled the development of great agricultural production, which led to a high level of demographic sustainability. In effect, the inhabitants of the region altered their environments, built permanent settlements, and established the first cities in the Western Hemisphere. The Maya were the best example of a rich culture and political tradition in Mesoamerica from pre-modern times. The Maya established numerous powerful and prosperous city-states, such as the city-states of Tikal in modern-day Guatemala, and Chichen Itza in the Yucatan Peninsula of modern-day Mexico. These Mayan cities had clear artistic and architectural influences from an earlier Mesoamerican civilization, the Olmec, which had been known for their cultivation of maize, production of rubber, religious polytheism and rituals, monumental architecture, and ceremonial centers. The Maya adopted these influences and thoroughly capitalized on them in the development of their city-states. Both Chichen Itza and Tikal host two of the largest Mayan pyramids, ballgame arenas, and ruins of marketplaces in all of Mesoamerica. On this slide, you see images from both Chichen Itza and Tikal. The top left photo is of the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent in Chichen Itza, Mexico. Below is the arena of the Mayan ball game, also located at Chichen Itza. To the right is the Pyramid of Tikal in Tikal, Guatemala. Both of these city-states were capable of sustaining populations near 50,000 inhabitants. That was socially organized by land ownership and relationship to the political and religious elites that reigned over the urban populations. Mayan city-states were never brought under a single imperial ruler like was experienced in many of the foundational civilizations of Mesopotamia, the Nile River Valley, and the Yellow River Valley of the Eastern Hemisphere. However, that did not stop Mesoamerican city-states from being powerful and prosperous. Perhaps the most impressive city-state in Mesoamerica prior to 1100 CE, in terms of architecture and population density, was Teotihuacan, which existed a bit further north of the Mayan city-states in present-day Mexico. The two photos to the right on this slide show the two spectacular pyramids of Teotihuacan. To the top right is the Temple of the Moon, and to the bottom right is the Temple of the Sun. An arriving group of nomadic peoples known as the Mexica would soon overtake the city-states of the Olmec and Maya in Mesoamerica. The Mexica had migrated from the north and began a settlement pattern that involved both their political and military takeover of the independent Mesoamerican city-states, as well as their adoption of and assimilation into Mesoamerican agrarian civilization and culture. Around 1345 CE, the Mexica established their capital city of Tenochtitlan, otherwise known as modern-day Mexico City, in the fertile lands of the nearby Lake Texcoco. It was from this superior city and landscape that the Mexica engineered Mesoamerica's first empire, the Aztec Empire. The Aztec capitalized on agricultural production by utilizing the Chinampa system of agriculture. Chinampas were man-made, lake-dredged islands that were fertilized through channels and canals, connecting the lakes and other useful bodies of water. The Aztec were able to produce an abundance of staple crops, such as maize, beans, squash, tomatoes, and peppers, as well as luxury goods such as cacao and vanilla. In spite of Mesoamerica's lack of metalworks as compared to civilizations in the Eastern Hemisphere, the Aztec developed highly specialized production skills in weaponry and art, as seen in the obsidian, jade, and turquoise artifacts on this slide. Probably the most recognizable development of Aztec culture was their ritualistic human sacrifices. More than likely influenced by earlier Mayan bloodletting rituals, Aztec sacrifices were as much a tribute to Aztec gods as they were a spectacle in the Aztec-governed cities. On this slide, you see a depiction of an Aztec sacrifice ritual atop a pyramid. In the Mayan religious beliefs from earlier times, from their creation myth called the Popol Vuh, the Mayan gods shed their own blood in order to create the earth, plant life, and human life. In return, Mayan peoples practiced bloodletting in order to stay in the good graces of their gods. Many historians believe that the Mayan practice of bloodletting, which did not intend to kill, and rarely did if ever, influenced the Aztec need for blood via human sacrifice, which did intend and ultimately resulted in the deaths of sacrificial victims. During the 15th century, the Aztec began extracting tribute from the neighbors they subjugated. Under Emperors Itzcoatl and Montezuma I, the Aztec raised armies to conquer nearby territory by using brutal military tactics. Aztecs from Tenochtitlan forged alliances with other strong nearby cities to govern an empire of 12 million people. The Aztec leadership continued to take tribute of crops, weaponry, skins and pelts, jewelry, vanilla, and cacao. Tribute enabled a concentration of wealth in Tenochtitlan, with cacao and vanilla being highly prized luxury items. Small marketplaces emerged in the cities south of Tenochtitlan by the 16th century, and the Aztec helped to foster long-distance trade throughout all of central Mexico. Crediting the Aztecs' successful diplomatic practices and tributary system, interestingly, their massive empire was built and maintained with no bureaucratic government, permanent army, or military garrisons. This highly developed imperial state would encounter the first Europeans in Mesoamerica with the arrival of the Spanish in 1519, and the Aztec Empire would be supplanted the following year with the defeat of its final emperor, Montezuma II. The South American political landscape developed similarly to the political landscape of Mesoamerica, in that both regions experienced prominent independent city-states that would eventually transition to an imperial political system due to the advances of an unsettled people. Modern-day Peru was the host of many independent city-states that flourished in agricultural production, the construction of permanent settlements, and artistic creativity. The earliest examples of these Peruvian independent states were the Chavan cult and the Mochi civilization, which existed during the last millennium BCE, whose religious and artistic developments, as well as their agricultural foundations, would reach beyond the time of their reign during pre-modern times and influence other later South American civilizations. Though in the highlands of the Andes Mountains, the land between the Peruvian coastline and the fertile region of Lake Titicaca served as a cradle of civilization, which would house even more extensive cultures, such as the autonomous regional states of Chiquito and Chimú, both of which prospered into the 13th century. An arriving group of nomadic Quiche-speaking peoples, known as the Inca, would soon overtake the independent states of the Andean Mountains region of South America. Like the Mexica, the Inca would both politically and militarily dominate pre-existing peoples, but also benefit from their pre-existent cultural and agricultural developments, and adopt many of those developments. During the 13th century, the Inca settled in Peru at the site of Cuzco near Lake Titicaca. Cuzco would come to serve as the Inca capital. Incan settlement near Lake Titicaca and other water sources enabled the development of terraced agriculture and artificial irrigation. The abundance of agriculture enabled Inca populations to increase and allowed for their cities to grow in dense populations. The Inca were able to produce an abundance of potatoes, sweet potatoes, maize, lima beans, tomatoes, green vegetables, peppers, and chilies. During the 15th century, the Incan Emperor Pachacuti began conquests of nearby settlements in the Andean region, including coastal Chimú. Inca leaders resettled warriors and artisans so as to maintain order and development within their growing empire. Unlike the Aztec, the Inca Empire utilized an elaborate bureaucratic administration, a permanent military, and an efficient courier network. Pachacuti also had his government build infrastructure, such as granaries or storehouses, and over 20,000 miles of stone road and rope bridges. These important pieces of infrastructure helped to foster great economic production and commercial exchange throughout the vast empire. Long-distance trade was established and regulated by the Inca government, and an Inca tax and tribute system was established throughout the empire, which made Cuzco a location of great wealth accumulation. In South America, the domestication of the alpaca and the llama enabled Inca peoples to transport large quantities of staple crops and luxury items throughout the vast commercial network of their empire. The alpaca and the llama were the only two large domesticated animals utilized in South America, but one of the delicacies of South American cuisine came from the domestication of small game animals, like the guinea pig. The Inca also developed quipu, a mnemonic device made of rope used to keep track of quantifiable information such as amounts, measures, property, and dates and time. Though no written works survive from Incan times, quipu allowed for the Inca to structure such an effective bureaucratic government. The Inca Empire would reign supreme over South America until 1533, when its last emperor, Atahualpa, was defeated by the arrival of the Spanish. In North America, many peoples foraged and hunted for wild plants and game. Those that were near the coasts or other water sources depended on fishing. However, a few North American peoples broke the foraging mold and developed intense agricultural civilizations. Though the territorial and demographic sizes of these North American settlements paled in comparison to that of the Aztec and Inca, the archaeological ruins of large residential, urban, military, monumental architectural and ceremonial buildings remained. One example of agrarian peoples located in North America were the Pueblo peoples of the southwest of what is today the United States, specifically in states like Colorado and New Mexico. The Pueblo peoples, though inhabitants of a relatively arid region, were able to irrigate their land with nearby rivers. They produced maize, beans, squash, and sunflowers. Their permanent settlements in Chaco Canyon and Mesa Verde are indicators of a highly developed civilization. But even to this day, archaeologists are unable to clearly define these settlements as part of a pre-modern state or chiefdom. Additionally, peoples of what is today the Midwest region of the United States developed agricultural civilization and permanent settlements. The Mississippian peoples of the Midwest built permanent settlements by building large earthen mounds and hollowing out large holes for residential and storage use. The platform of the mounds were more than likely used for public markets and ceremonial activities. The largest city of the Mississippian peoples was Cahokia, located in the current state of Illinois. Cahokia was more than likely the residence of a political elite within a large chiefdom that encompassed multiple villages and cities. Pueblo and Mississippian peoples continued with their agrarian ways of life from approximately 700 CE until the arrival of Europeans in the 16th century CE. Once again, consider some parallels between these early American civilizations and the civilizations of the Eastern Hemisphere that we've studied to this point in Unit 1, the Global Tapestry. Consider state building in the Americas and how it compared with state building in the Eastern Hemisphere. Did smaller scale states like small kingdoms and city-states of the Americas develop similarly to the smaller kingdoms and city-states of South and Southeast Asia? Were the Aztec and Inca empires comparable in their developments of state with the imperial dynasties of China or even the Islamic world? Did the economic and technological developments of American civilizations compare with those of the Eastern Hemisphere? Consider reasons why more Eastern Hemispheric civilizations gravitated to monotheism, while Western Hemispheric peoples remained in polytheistic belief systems. Remember, do not just look to study these global tapestry civilizations as isolated societies. Think like an historian and make the connections and parallels among these global tapestry civilizations.